Hello everyone. Today is the 17th video of my web development question video series. Today I am going to discuss the question 17 of my question list. So without further ado, let's go to our question list. Here you can see under day 3, here's the question number 3. This is also going to be the question 17, and we completed the question 16. Here is the question 17. Okay. As usual, I'm going to read the question first, and after that let's review my design and the code. Design the web page below. It should be responsive for small, medium and large devices. Here they gave us a sample image to refer. Create a database name test with one table names users. The users table should only have two columns, email and password. The email is the primary key of the database table. Create a PHP program to add users to the database. Okay. This is the requirement relevant to the database we have to create when we are storing data using this web page. And after that, here are another set of requirements we have to follow. In this case, every field should be validated. Okay. Create a database connection between the web page and database. Create an SQL query to add data to the database. Execute that SQL query. The web page cannot reload upon button click. Okay. The last one is a very important part, because when we are creating the web page or programming the web page, we have to use the Ajax technology. That's the method we are using if we don't want to reload the web page when we are sending some data into the server side to process. Okay, and that's the question. Now I'm going to show you my answer. Here you can see I created a similar web page to the sample image they gave us to refer. And first, let me go back to the answer. Go back to the question again. Here you can see every field should be validated. Okay. Now I'm going to insert or register a user in my web page, and before that. But before that, I'm going to check the validation part. Okay. For that, I'm going to click on the add user button without inserting any data. These two input fields. Let's click on this button. You can see there's an error message. You need to fill both fields. Okay, that's the error message they gave us. The web page gave us, and here I'm going to fill the first input field, the email field. Okay, here I fill the email field, and let's click on the add user button again without filling the password field. You can see the same error message pop up again. You need to fill both fields. Okay. That means we validated these two input fields, and I'm giving it a password, and let's register this user. I completed, I filled both fields, and the user should be registered now. Okay, let's click on this button. You can see new user successfully registered. Okay, that's the message which will come when we insert a user successfully, and you can see the both email and password fields reset automatically. That's another feature in my web page. And now let me show you my database, and let's see whether our details are stored in that web page or not. Okay, sorry, the database or not. Okay, let's go to our database. Here I open the ADSQL browser, and you can see this is the database I created, and after that here is the table user, and let me show you the attributes inside my table. Here email and password, and also email is the primary key. You can see the primary key mark, and let's go to our data tab and refresh the page to see whether our details are stored or not. Okay, I'm going to refresh the page. You can see anukrama@gmail.com, and here's the password. That's the email and the password we insert to our web page now, and those details are stored in our database. Okay, that's how my web page works, and let's review our code. Here I'm going to open the Visual Code Studio, and here is the day 3, and here's the question 3, and here's the answer. Let's go to the index page. Okay, here is the index page, and you can see the registration area and also the login area. And let me show you the question again. Here the web page should be responsive for small, medium and large devices. Let's see that one. You can see I use the Bootstrap 5 framework and apply that classes into my HTML elements to make my website responsive. Let me show you that one. Let's go to my answer again, and you can see when I am changing the size. This is the tablet view. You can see when I am changing the size of the web page, specifically the width of the web page, it will change its design to show all the necessary details to the customer according to the screen size they are accessing or watching this web page. Okay, that's how I created the web page responsive. And let's go back to the code again. Okay, I explain how I done the responsive part, and also I show the validation part, and I insert a user and show you the database. Here email and password was there, and I created the table and also make the email field the primary key. Okay, now I'm going to review my other parts of the web page, like inserting the data and validating the data. Here this is a usual simple HTML page. Here registration page and the login page. In this part of the question, only the registration page is the functioning part, and here you can see there's a important attribute in this button. Here's the button, input type button. That means this button, add user button, and in that add user button I assign an on-click attribute, and it will execute a JavaScript function called add user when someone click on that button. That's the purpose of that attribute. And let me go to the JavaScript file. You can see in the JavaScript file, on the top of this JavaScript file, here I created a variable, new two variables called INE field and INP field. That means input email field and input password field. Okay, here I assigned the element by calling it the ID I gave it to the input field. Here you can see in the input field there are two separate IDs I gave I gave to the input fields, and in the JavaScript file I assigned those two elements to a new JavaScript variables. And after that, here you can see the add user function. This is the add user function, and this function will execute when someone click on that button, add user. And in that function you can see new two variables will create called INE and INP, and it will store. You can see I assign the value of INE field. INE field means the input element we assign to that variable. I call access that element, HTML element, by calling the variable name. And you can see it will not going to assign that element, it will extract the value in that input field. That means the value someone type on this input field, and then it will assign that value, only the value, into this new variable. The password field is same. And after that, here you can see I created a form object. I talk about this form objects in my previous videos, and I explained many things about these form objects. We usually use the form object to store many details, and we can access, or we can send those details. If there are many details, not one or two, there are more than one data you want to send to the server side, you can append those details into a form and send that form to the server side. So it will be easy. That's why I create this object, form object, and I append the email field. That's the value inside the email field, and the password. I append that those two details into the form object. And here you can see I created a new value called key, and here's the value AU. That's the new value I append to the form object. And when we are sending sending the form object, it will send these three values, or these three details, to the server side. Okay, I'll explain this key and its value when we go to the process.php file. But let me skip this one, and let's talk about this Ajax object. You can see here I use the Ajax method. This is the method I use to stop the reloading when we are submitting details. I explained about the Ajax object a lot in my previous videos, but if you didn't know what is an Ajax object, basically it's a method we use to send data without alerting the user to the server side. So here I created the Ajax object, and after that let me skip the code line starting from line 15 to line 28. I'll talk about that after, about those lines after I explain the process.php file. And let's talk about this one. Here in the code line 29, I call the Ajax object. You can see I created the Ajax object. This is the Ajax object, and assign that whole object to a separate new JavaScript variable called R, and I call that Ajax object using the variable name, and I assign an open method to that variable. Here in that open method, I define the method I want to transfer these details. I need to transfer these details using the post method. Post method is a more secure way to transfer when we are transferring sensitive details like password. So that's why I use the post method. If you use there's another method called get. If you use that get method, it will transfer the details combined to the URL, so it will be less secure than the post method. That's why I use the more secure method, the post method. And here I define the destination I want to send these details. That means the server side file. In this case, there is a file called process.php. The reason why I am calling that file the server side file, in this PHP file, let me show you that PHP file. Here you can see there's no any HTML element here. When there's no HTML element, that means there's no design in this web page. If someone view this web page, he cannot see anything because the PHP is a language which will execute only on server side, and it used to process the data inside in server side. That's why I call this process.php file the server side file. Okay, and here you can see after I define the destination, here there's another keyword called true. True means we are using the Ajax method. If we use the keyword false, that means we are using the Ajax method. There are two type of technologies, Ajax and Ajax, but in this case I'm using the Ajax method. And after that, here you can see I assign another method called send, and when this line executed, it will send the details to the process.php file, and when sending these details I append the form to that request, so it will send the details inside that form object with the request to the process.php file. Now let's go to the process.php file, and in the file you can see I started a new session. That's here. I started the PHP script first, and after that here you can see session start. That means I started a new session, and after that here you can see in the question, let me show you the question again. Create a database connection between web page and database. Okay, that's why I use this code. This is the connection to my web page to the database. Here you can see this is the these are the credentials to log into the database management system. Here you can see the username and the password, and also the location. In this case, the database management system is or the MySQL server is installed in my own PC. That's why I use the localhost keyword, and here is the database name, and after that here is the port. Okay, that's the connection. I use the object oriented method to connect with my database, and I assigned that connection to a new PHP variable called DBMS. Okay, and after that here you can see there's a if else condition. In that if condition, it will check. You can see is set $_post key and $_post key equal AU. That means it will check whether there is a value. There is a detail which will come to the server side with a request called key, and also it will check the value of this name key is equal to AU. If both these conditions are met, it will execute this part of the code, and if one of these conditions are not met, it will execute only this else part. It will echo a text called error. So it will show on a alert in our web page when there's an error. Okay, and after that let me explain what happened when this part of the code is executed. You can see I created another if else condition or if else block, and in that if block you can see it will check empty $_post and INE, and here these symbols we use this symbol to represent the O operator, and we use this two AND marks to represent the AND operator. If we use the O method when we are mentioning about two conditions, only one condition is enough to trigger this part of the code. It's not necessary to meet both these conditions true. And after that it will check, you can see it will check whether there's a name called INE which will come with the post which will come in post method with the request, and also it will check there's a name called INP. if there's a name called INP or INE, it will check whether those whether the values inside these names are empty. If they are empty, it will execute this part of the code line and it will left these lines, and actually it's not going to execute these lines. If these conditions are not met, it will execute this else part. That means the value of the name INE and INP are not empty, so it will execute this part. And here in the else condition, you can see I created another two set of PHP variables and I assigned the values of the name of the value which will come in post method INE and INP. In this case, I am assigning the email and the password which will come with the Ajax request to two separate variables. And after that, here you can see there's another variable and I created a SQL query to select. You can see I created a select query. I use this query to check whether these details are already stored in my database. So you can see it will check email and the password, email attribute and the password attribute in the database. Let me show you. It will check these two attributes and the values inside this attribute, and if it find a similar values to these email and password, it will execute. You can see after I executed this database connection, and if the values already stored in my database, it will execute this part of the code user already registered. That's the text which will output if there's a if the data is already registered in my database. And after that, here you can see if this part of the code not executed. That means let me explain these two code lines before when we come to that part. After I created the SQL query, you can see I execute that SQL query using the database connection. Here DBMS means the database connection we created earlier, and I use that connection to execute this select query in this to this database, and it will check the attributes email and the password to the password if there's any similar value recorded in the database. And after that, here you can see when we execute a select query, every time there will be a result set. So that's why I created another new variable and stored that result set, or I assigned that result set to that variable. And in the next line here you can see it will check the number of rows, the result set which will outputted from the query. That result set is always going to be in table format, so there will be rows like this one. Here you can see there are rows or records. After this code line execute, it will count how many rows are there in that result set, and it will input that, or it will assign that number into a new variable called SNOR. That means the number of rows in the result set. And after that, there's another if else condition, if else block, and it will check whether SNOR is equal to 1. That means it will check whether the result set have a record. If there's a record, that means the data is already there, or the data is already stored in our database, so it will execute this error code user already registered. Okay, if the SNOR value is not equal to 1, that means there's no values related to the email and the password user entered. So now we can that means we can insert these details, because they are new details. So we can write the insert query. Here I wrote the insert query, and I inserted the two values, email and the password, to the database. And after that I execute. This is the part this is the code line I use to execute this query. I use the database connection when I am executing that insert query, and after the data registered, it will output this text called number 1. So that will be the output, and every time this page execute, it will output some text, and that text will be sent back to the client computer with the Ajax response. Okay, here now I'm going to explain these code lines I skipped earlier, starting from line 15 to 28. You can see I check the state of my Ajax object by using this method onReady state change. That means it will check whether the state of my Ajax object is changed or not. Every time the state of my Ajax object change, it will execute this function. You can see I assign a function. These kind of functions called anonymous functions. So every time the Ajax object change its state, it will execute this function. In that function, you can see there's a if-else condition. In the first if block, you can see it will check the state of the Ajax object and whether that state is equal to 4 or not. If the state is equal to 4, it will execute this part of the code, and if the state is not equal 4, it will do nothing. So you can see there's no else part, so it will do nothing when the state is not equal to 4. The state is the place where the Ajax object, the current place of the Ajax object. That means number 1, there are approximately 4 states to the Ajax object. Usually we say the state number 1 is leaving the client side computer to the server side, and number 2 is reaching to the server side, and 3 is waiting until the process is complete, and after that number 4 is return to the client side with the response after the process in that server side file. Okay, that means we need the number 4. So that means the output of the server side file is come to the client side computer. So if the state is equal to 4, it will execute this part. You can see I created a new variable called text, and after that I assign the response text. Response text means the outputted text which will come with the response, and it will store that text in a new variable called text. And after that you can see there's another if condition, and it will check the value inside the text variable is equal to 1 or not. If the text is equal to 1, that means it output the process.php file outputted this value. It means that new user is registered. So if the value outputted from the process.php file is not equal to 1, that means there's some error inside the some error in our process. Okay, here you can see it will checking whether the process is successful, and if the process is successful, it will alert this text new user successfully registered. And after that you can remember when I insert the user successfully, it automatically reset the two input fields. You can see in the code line, this is the pattern. It will reset the code lines, input field dot value, and you can see I assigned a empty value to input email input field and the password input field. That are the two input elements inside input elements of the index page. Okay, so when these two lines executed, it will empty or reset the values inside the two input fields, and that's the part which will, or that's the process which will execute when a user successfully registered. But if the user if there's a problem in the values which are the user inserted, you can see it will execute only this part. There's an alert, and it will show the value assigned to the text variable. That means the text which will outputted from the process.php file. You can see if this text is output, there's a error message, and here's another error message. You can see all of these text are errors, and it will show that error message when there's a error. Okay, that's the whole process of this registration part, and I think that's it for this video. I explained the database and also the validation part, and I show the connection to the database, and also I show the how I add data to the database using the SQL query, and also show how to execute the SQL query. And I make the website, and I make a website which will not reload when user insert these details using the Ajax technology. Okay, I think that's it for this video. Let's see you in a next video. Thank you very much for watching.